was not what the man who set up the Mayor's office as Minister for London had in mind.
I'm not quite sure why Mayor Livingston felt inclined to do this foray into international politics. I think it's a mistake. I think Mr. Chavez's regime in Venezuela has all sorts of questions to be asked about it, and I don't think it's appropriate in any case for an individual authority in this country to be trying to enter into bilateral relations with another country.
The Mayor's extraordinary deal with Chavez is a very odd use of his powers. The way it was sold also makes no financial sense. The Mayor is using the Venezuelan money to subsidise half-price travel for London's unemployed.
We estimate 250,000 Londoners will now benefit by having a half-price concession on the buses and trams.
Strong socialist stuff. If only his sums added up. If 250,000 people take up this fare cut, the cost would be more like £70 million, not the 15 million Chavez has donated. Almost £1 million of the money has already been spent on advertising the deal. You'd have thought, with maths like that, the Mayor would have at least consulted the people who have to make London's transport budget balance. But the entire deal took Professor Stephen Glaister and the Board of Transport for London by surprise.
How exactly did you find out about the Venezuela oil deal?
We heard about that the same way as everybody else did.
Through the newspapers? I mean, wouldn't it have been a little bit more proper for you to be informed in a more formal way?
Perfectly proper. It's the Mayor's decision. It's not the TfL's decision. The TfL board does not approve that decision.
I mean, how typical is this of the way in which Ken Livingstone interacts with bodies such as yourself?
Entirely typical.
By making this alliance with President Chavez, the Mayor appears to be putting ideology above the interests of London. What worries me is the way in which he and his advisers are prepared to impose their personal agenda on this city. In 2004, the Mayor played host to Yusuf al-Qaradawi, a controversial Muslim cleric.
You are truly welcome. Welcome to London, a city of all things.
Al-Qaradawi's published views include the opinion that, through Allah's infinite wisdom, he has given the weak a weapon the strong do not have, and that is the ability to turn their bodies into bombs as Palestinians do. The way Ken Livingstone embraced this man on behalf of Londoners alienated some of his oldest allies. Peter Tatchell used to advise the Mayor on gay and lesbian issues.
I've been a very strong supporter of Ken Livingstone for nearly 30 years. I think overall he has been a good mayor for London, but I do think there are a number of issues he's made some monumental misjudgments. When I questioned the rationale and the ethics of inviting Yusuf al-Qaradawi to London, the relationship with Ken Livingstone suddenly changed. Ken took the view that because I didn't agree with him inviting to London someone who was anti-Semitic, homophobic, misogynistic, and who justifies terrorist suicide bombings, because I opposed that, I was an Islamophobe.
Tatchell was not alone. Journalists, campaigners, and many Muslims questioned the wisdom of al-Qaradawi's visit. The Mayor's response was to spend nearly £6,000 of taxpayers' money on a report defending Qaradawi and suggesting the controversy was cooked up by a former member of the Israeli Secret Service.
He is surrounded by some advisers who come out of a history of very sectarian left-wing politics. They take a very black and white view of the world. You're either 100% for them or 100% against them. In many ways, they're like Bush. You know, exactly the mentality of Bush. Either you're for Bush or you're against Bush.
Like Tatchell, I've also locked horns with the Mayor over his support for radical Islam and find his labelling of all critics on this subject as Islamophobes ridiculous. In November, I heard the Mayor plan to launch yet another report, this time on Islamophobia in the media, at a press conference in City Hall.
They decided to take one whole week in the media cycle and analysed any article in the press relating to Muslims or Islam. The result was that 91% of the stories portrayed a negative image of Islam and Muslims.
I'd like to know how you can justify spending public money on this kind of work.
The Greater London Authority Act places a duty on the Mayor to promote good race and faith relationships within the city.
The Mayor says it's his duty to publish reports like this, but the document appears to me to be a thinly veiled pretext for launching an attack on his critics in the press. Some of the stories classed as negative could not have been reported sensibly in any other way, such as the London bombings and a driving ban for a boxing star who happens to be a Muslim. Can you say, hand on heart, that the report that you published, that you're happy with it?
I mean, I'm not concerned, and I'm the only person with a vote, so it's no great problem here. I mean, this work is commissioned by me, I am happy with it, I am publishing it.
The Mayor may say he's happy with this report, which cost £31,700, but it was roundly dismissed in the press as oversimplistic propaganda. He's allowed to spend such large sums of public money like this because the mechanisms designed to hold the Mayor to account are just not up to the job. When the institution of Mayor was created in 1999, the government also formed a body called the London Assembly, made up of 25 elected politicians from around London. Its job is to scrutinise the work of the Mayor.
I think what happened when the Mayor of London was being created is that the government at the time created an assembly to oversee the Mayor that frankly is much weaker than it probably needs to be in order to hold the Mayor properly to account.
When we arrived, we had an induction, and we wanted to understand how the mass of civil servants, the officers who work for the GLA as a body, would operate in terms of their relationship to us and their relationship to the Mayor, and how would they operate if we were on the same subject on opposite sides. You know, where would the Chinese walls be and all of that sort of stuff. So they produced a flowchart to demonstrate how this officer body, which is massive, would work. And it had this huge arrow from the officer body to the Mayor, and this tiny little arrow from the officer body to the Assembly. And thus it was.
The weakness of the Assembly is that it only has one sanction, to reject the Mayor's annual budget, but it never has. This allows the Mayor to have the upper hand. For example, on the 13th of June last year, he defended his highly paid transport advisor, Bob Kiley, against criticisms he was being paid to do nothing whilst a recovering alcoholic. Livingston was able to walk all over the elected members.
Those who are sniggering at the moment. Wait, and neither do all of you do the work you're paid for, given you're paid £50,000 a year to come in and do a full day's work. Most of you aren't doing that, and you're taking the money, and frankly that's almost fraudulent on the council taxpayer.
I think Ken Livingstone, as Mayor of London, quite often gives the impression he thinks many members of the Assembly are dunderheads. I mean, he just doesn't give them the kind of respect you might normally think that a leader of an institution like that might, but that's his personal style.
You casually use words to smear someone who's a giant compared with a midget like yourself, frankly, and so say the truth, admit it.
Some people might say, well, perhaps it's simply the case that you are not up to your job.
They would be entitled to draw that conclusion. They'd be entitled to certainly have that impression. We are there by the Act of 1999 to hold the Mayor to the account, to be the check and the balance. But in reality, we can't.
I think the Assembly tries its best, but it really doesn't have the appropriate power or the necessary people, I think, or the attractiveness